The crumbling warehouse loomed against the slate-gray February sky, its rusted metal exterior barely visible through the dense morning fog that clung to the industrial district on the outskirts of Pine Haven, Oregon. Officer Mackenzie Rivers pulled her department SUV to a stop at the edge of the gravel lot, headlights cutting through the mist to reveal a weathered "No Trespassing" sign hanging askew from a chain-link fence encrusted with decades of oxidation and neglect. "Not exactly prime real estate," she murmured, checking her watch. 6:15 a.m. early even for us. Behind her in the specially modified K9 compartment, Atlas shifted with anticipation, his dark eyes focused intently on the abandoned building through the window. The 4-year-old Belgian Malinois had been unusually alert since they'd received the call 20 minutes earlier, his muscular body tense with a readiness that Mackenzie had learned to recognize over their 3 years together. Mackenzie zipped her police jacket against the biting cold as she released Atlas from the vehicle. His lean frame moved with fluid precision beside her. The official Cadaver detection K9 vest, a stark contrast against his fawn coat. At 70 pounds, Atlas was slightly smaller than most working Malinois, but what he lacked in size, he more than compensated for with focus and intelligence. The warehouse had once been the primary storage facility for Donovan Construction, the company that had built half of Pine Haven during the town's expansion in the 1990s and early 2000s. Abandoned after Robert Donovan's mysterious disappearance. 12 years earlier, it stood as a decaying monument to the town's most enduring mystery. The property had changed hands multiple times since then, but no business had occupied the space, as if the unresolved questions surrounding Donovan's fate had rendered it untouchable. Detective Victor Hargrove's unmarked sedan appeared through the fog, pulling alongside them. The veteran detective emerged with a grimace, clutching a coffee cup as if it were a lifeline. At 63, Hargrove carried the weight of his 38 years on the force in the deep lines etched around his eyes and the permanent furrow between his brows. His salt and pepper hair had given way mostly to salt, though he maintained the same military precise haircut he'd worn since joining the department fresh from the Marine Corps in 1985. "Officer Rivers," he nodded curtly, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Let's not waste time. Demolition crew is scheduled here Monday, and I pulled a lot of strings to get this place checked before they bring it down." Mackenzie understood the subtext. Victor Hargrove had been the lead detective on the Donovan case from the beginning. With his retirement approaching in less than 3 months, this was likely his last chance to resolve the investigation that had defined the latter half of his career. As they approached the warehouse, Hargrove explained the situation. Building inspector noticed that section of concrete looks newer than the rest. Probably nothing could be repairs after equipment removal. But given this place was owned by Donovan until he vanished 12 years ago, the heavy padlock on the main entrance had already been cut, the metal door standing slightly ajar. As they pulled it open wider, the protesting screech of rusted hinges pierced the morning stillness, startling a nest of pigeons into flight from the rafters above. Inside the cavernous space was a graveyard of industrial ghosts, abandoned machinery silhouettes dangling electrical cables, and concrete floors stained with decades of oil and chemicals. Weak light filtered through dirty skylights, illuminating dancing dust particles and pale shafts that barely penetrated the gloom. "Place like this," Hargrove muttered, scanning the vast interior. "Probably full of false positives, chemicals, animal remains, who knows what else." He gestured toward a far corner where several rats scattered at their approach. Atlas remained perfectly composed, waiting for his command to begin. Unlike some of the more excitable working dogs Mackenzie had encountered during training, Atlas possessed a patience that bordered on unnerving, a stillness that concealed the intensity he brought to his work. Robert Donovan warned shine. Hargrove began shining his flashlight across the vast space. Was practically royalty in Pine Haven. His construction company built half the town, including the hospital, the high school, and most of the River District development. Mackenzie nodded, having grown up in Pine Haven. Though she'd been only 16 when Donovan disappeared, she remembered the impact it had on the community. The search parties, the speculation, the gradual transition from hopeful investigation to grim acceptance. December 2011, he vanishes without a trace. Hargrove continued, his voice echoing slightly in the empty building. Car found at Portland International Airport, but no record of him boarding any flights. Credit cards, unused passport still in his home safe. By all appearances, a successful, well-respected businessman with no enemies just walked away from his life. Family still in the area? Mackenzie asked, navigating around a fallen shelf. Wife remarried and moved to California years ago. Son Christopher runs what's left of the company, mostly manages existing properties. They both cooperated fully during the original investigation. The detective's flashlight beam caught a faded company logo on one wall. Donovan Construction, the stylized D barely visible beneath years of grime and neglect. After he disappeared, the company downsized, sold off properties. This place changed hands 3 times since then. Current owner is some developer from Seattle planning to demolish it for condominiums. Hargrove's tone made it clear what he thought of outsiders coming in to redevelop his town. Atlas walked obediently at Mackenzie's side as they made their way deeper into the warehouse, carefully avoiding debris scattered across the floor. The dog's nose worked continuously, sampling the air, but maintaining discipline, waiting for the specific command that would release him to search. I've been with major crimes 26 years. Hargrove continued, his voice taking on a confessional quality that surprised Mackenzie. Donovan case was the one that always bothered me most. Successful businessman, no known enemies, stable marriage, just gone. It doesn't happen that way. People don't just vanish, they're taken or they run or they die. And if they die, they leave something behind. Any serious suspects? Mackenzie asked, watching Atlas carefully for changes in his body language as they penetrated deeper into the building. His business partner, Lawrence Mitchell, inherited control of the company. That always raises red flags. But he had an alibi for when Donovan was last seen charity dinner with 200 witnesses, including the mayor. Hargrove's mouth tightened. We looked hard at Mitchell anyway, but nothing stuck. Man's become one of the wealthiest developers in the state since then. Funny how that works out. The bitterness in his voice revealed more than his words. This case was personal for Hargrove, an unsolved mystery that would haunt his retirement if left unresolved. They reached a cleared area near the building's center where portable work lights had been set up, illuminating a roughly 20-60 ft section of concrete floor. While young officer Mackenzie, recognized as Davis, stood guard beside the equipment, looking bored and chilled. Building inspector was doing final assessment before demolition. When he noticed this, Hargrove said, pointing to a large rectangular section that even to Mackenzie's untrained eye appeared slightly different in color and texture from the surrounding floor. Rest of the floor has clear expansion joints every 10 feet or so. This section continuous pour, probably done years after original construction. Mackenzie noticed other investigators had already marked the perimeter of the different concrete with orange spray paint, creating a stark boundary that stood out against the dirty gray surface. We've had 3 different false alarms over the years, Hargrove said, his tone making it clear he expected nothing different today. Anonymous tips, psychic claims, even a previous cadaver dog search in 2013 that found nothing. I'm only here because the building's coming down and I couldn't live with myself if we'd missed something, you so know. He fixed Mackenzie with a skeptical gaze, the morning light accentuating the deep wrinkles around his eyes, years of squinting at crime scenes, of looking too hard and finding too little. So let's not get ahead of ourselves. 9 times out of 10, these cold case searches just reopen old wounds for the families. He gestured toward Atlas. Your dog find anything significant? Great if not. We document that we did our due diligence and let the wrecking ball do its thing on Monday. Mackenzie understood his caution but had complete faith in Atlas. Unlike the K9 from the previous search, a German Shepherd trained primarily for patrol work with only basic cadaver detection training. Atlas had specialized training specifically for long-term decomposition detection. He'd been part of a pilot program with the FBI's Forensic Canine Unit before joining the Pine Haven Police Department. Let's find out what's here, she said, unclipping Atlas's leash. Ready to work, boy. The Belgian Malinois looked up at her, amber eyes focused and intelligent, waiting for the command that would set him free to do what he'd been born and trained to do. Atlas C, Mackenzie commanded using the specific cadaver search command that differentiated from his tracking work. The dog immediately transitioned from the calm, attentive partner to a focused working machine, his entire demeanor shifting as he began a methodical search pattern across the warehouse floor. His nose worked continuously, sampling air currents, his movements precise and calculated. He's nationally certified in human remains detection. Mackenzie explained to Hargrove, who watched with arms crossed, trained to detect decomposition in all stages, from recent to skeletal remains that could be decades old. He's found bodies buried 6 feet deep and under concrete before, in controlled settings, Hargrove pointed out, or in cases where we already know someone's there. Different ballgame when you're cold searching. He doesn't know the difference. Mackenzie replied simply, the training's the same. Atlas moved with practiced efficiency, his nose working continuously, sampling the air currents that circulated through the cavernous space. His search pattern was precise, a grid arrangement that Mackenzie had trained him to follow, ensuring no area would be missed. How accurate is he? Hargrove asked, observing the dog's focused movements. In controlled testing, 98% accuracy. He's never had a false positive in actual fieldwork. Mackenzie answered her eyes, never leaving her partner. Atlas alerts only when he's absolutely certain. 20 minutes into the search, Atlas had covered about half the warehouse floor, showing moderate interest in a few areas, but moving on quickly. His behavior was what Mackenzie recognized as normal investigative interest rather than alert behavior. What's he doing now? Hargrove asked as Atlas suddenly lifted his head, nostrils flaring widely. Catching something in the air currents, Mackenzie explained, watch how his behavior changes. Atlas's movements became more directed, less methodical, as he began tracking an invisible scent cone to its source. His tail, which had been relaxed now, straightened, the first sign Mackenzie recognized as increased interest. He moved purposefully toward the marked section of newer concrete near the center of the warehouse. As he reached the edge of the different colored concrete, Atlas's behavior shifted dramatically. His body tensed, ears rigid, his sniffing becoming more rapid and shallow, what handlers called bracketing, working to precisely locate the strongest source of scent. He's onto something, Mackenzie said quietly, moving closer as Atlas began circling a specific 3-foot area near the center of the marked concrete. Could be chemical spills. Hargrove noted place was a construction warehouse. Probably all kinds of solvents and adhesives soaked into that concrete over the years. Atlas suddenly sat staring intently at the floor, then looked back at Mackenzie before returning his gaze to the exact same spot of behavior she knew well. That's a passive alert, Mackenzie explained, her voice taking on an edge of excitement despite her attempt to remain professional. He's trained to sit when he locates human remains. Lots of things can mimic decomposition odor. Hargrove countered, though Mackenzie noted he was watching Atlas with growing interest. Certain chemicals, dead animals, even some fungi produce similar compounds. As if hearing the detective's doubt, Atlas stood, moved directly to the center of the suspicious concrete patch, and began pawing at the surface, then sat again more insistently this time. He's clarifying his alert, Mackenzie said. He only does that when he's absolutely certain. One alert doesn't justify bringing in a concrete cutting team. Hargrove argued, though Mackenzie could see his professional skepticism, battling with the hope that had likely sustained him through 12 years of dead ends. Atlas suddenly stood again, returning to the same spot this time, scratching more vigorously at the concrete, a low whine building in his throat. This behavior was rare, something Mackenzie had seen only twice before in their partnership. Detective, I've worked with Atlas for 3 years, she insisted, moving closer to her dog. This isn't ambiguous behavior. There are human remains under this concrete. I'd stake my career on it. Atlas's scratching intensified his claws, making a desperate sound against the concrete as foam began to form at the corners of his mouth. Not from aggression, but from the intensity of his focus. This was the behavior Mackenzie recognized from their most difficult recovery cases, when remains were deeply buried or heavily concealed. "He's going to damage his paws," she said, moving toward him. "Atlas, enough, good boy, show me." The command prompted Atlas to stop scratching and instead circle the area repeatedly, his nose barely an inch from the surface, occasionally stopping to place one paw precisely on a spot before looking back at Mackenzie with unwavering certainty. "I've never seen him this adamant," she told Hargrove. "Whatever's down there, he's absolutely positive." Officer Davis had approached, drawn by Atlas's unusual behavior. "Should I call in the forensic team, detective?" Hargrove hesitated, years of disappointment warring with the evidence before him. "Let's get a closer look at this concrete first." A forensic technician who had been documenting the scene approached, kneeling to examine the concrete more closely. Sonia Martinez had been with the department for 15 years, specializing in trace evidence and material analysis. "The color and texture definitely don't match the original floor," she confirmed after a careful examination. "This was poured long after the initial construction." "How can you tell?" Hargrove asked. Martinez pointed to subtle differences visible under her flashlight. "See these tool marks, a different pattern than the surrounding areas, and notice this slight lip around the edges." She ran her gloved finger along the perimeter. "This was done by someone with construction knowledge, but not a professional concrete finisher." "How long would you say?" Mackenzie asked, noticing that Atlas had positioned himself directly on the spot again, refusing to move even when called. Martinez studied the surface, comparing it to other sections of the floor. "Can't be precise without testing, but based on weathering and discoloration, compared to the original, I'd estimate 10 to 15 years ago, which fits our timeline," Mackenzie noted, looking meaningfully at Hargrove. Atlas had begun barking now, the sound echoing harshly through the warehouse, a behavior he reserved for when his handlers weren't responding quickly enough to his alerts. "Even if there is something," Hargrove said, standing and brushing dust from his hands. "Bringing in cutting equipment, obtaining the proper warrants, setting up evidence preservation protocols. We're talking significant department resources based on a dog's behavior. With respect, Detective..." Mackenzie countered, her voice remaining professional but taking on an edge of intensity. "This isn't just any behavior. This is exactly what he's trained to do, and he's telling us something's here. Atlas has located remains that were missed by ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs with less specialized training. If he says something's here, something is here." Hargrove took a long moment, looking between the determined K-9 officer and her equally determined partner, who continued circling the suspicious concrete section. Officer Davis and Martinez watched the exchange, silently aware of the weight of the decision. Davis, whom Hargrove finally called, "Contact Judge Rosenthal. We need an expedited warrant to break through this section of floor and get forensic services to send their concrete team with collection equipment with a Shenny." He turned back to Mackenzie. "If we're going to do this, we're doing it by the book, full evidence, protocols, controlled excavation. If your dog is right, whatever's under there has been waiting a long time. It can wait a few more hours to be recovered properly." Mackenzie nodded, relief evident in her expression. "Thank you, Atlas, and I will remain on scene to assist." Atlas had finally settled, lying sphinx-like at the edge of the marked concrete section, his eyes never leaving the spot he'd identified, standing guard over what he knew lay beneath. Summoner Tunam. For Mackenzie Rivers, the journey to this warehouse floor had been long and unexpected. At 34, she had never planned on becoming a K-9 officer. Her early career ambitions had been focused on military service, following in the footsteps of her father, a career Army officer, 8 years in the military police, including 2 deployments to Afghanistan, had given her the structure and purpose she craved. But her second tour had ended abruptly when an IED took the lives of 2 members of her unit and left her with a severe concussion, persistent tinnitus, and the invisible wounds of PTSD. The discharge papers called it medical, but Mackenzie had always felt it was really about the panic attacks that made her unreliable in high-stress situations. At least that's what her commanding officer had implied during their final conversation. Returning to civilian life in Pine Haven had been harder than she'd anticipated. The small Oregon town where she'd grown up felt simultaneously too familiar and completely foreign. Her parents had retired to Arizona years earlier, leaving no immediate family to ease her transition. The police department had been a logical landing place with her MP background, but the first 2 years had been a struggle. The hypervigilance, the startled responses, the difficulty connecting with fellow officers who hadn't seen what she had. The K-9 program had saved her career and possibly her life. What began as a temporary assignment filling in for an injured handler during training exercises became a revelation. Something about working with the dogs quieted the chaos in her mind. Their straightforward communication, their focus on the present moment, their unconditional partnership offered a clarity she hadn't experienced since before her deployment. When the opportunity came to join the specialized cadaver detection program, Mackenzie had volunteered immediately. The assignment meant additional training travel to Quantico for the FBI's forensic canine program and the eventual partnership with Atlas, a dog the military trainers had deemed too independent for tactical deployment, but perfect for the specialized detection work that required problem-solving and initiative. Their partnership hadn't always been smooth. Atlas's independent streak had initially manifested as stubbornness, and Mackenzie had to earn his respect before he would work consistently for her. The breakthrough came 6 months into their partnership when Atlas located a missing hiker's remains in a ravine that 3 other search teams had cleared. Since then, they'd become one of the most effective human remains detection teams in the Pacific Northwest. Atlas had given Mackenzie something beyond professional success. He'd given her a purpose that transcended her own struggles. On her worst days, when the memories pressed too close and the world seemed hostile, Atlas's solid presence anchored her to the present. And on days like today, when his extraordinary abilities might bring closure to a family and justice to a victim, she felt a pride that washed away all doubts about her path. Arman. 3 hours later, the warehouse had transformed into a controlled excavation site. Portable lights on stands created harsh shadows across the concrete floor, while specialized cutting equipment stood ready for use. A team from Forensic Services had established an evidence processing station nearby with collection materials organized by type paper bags. Plastic containers, evidence markers, and specialized tools for extracting materials from concrete. Christopher Donovan, the victim's son, had arrived an hour earlier, having been notified of the potential development in his father's case. Now 43, he had inherited his father's height and broad shoulders, but where Robert Donovan had been known for his ready smile and charismatic presence, Christopher carried himself with a guarded intensity. 12 years of uncertainty had left visible marks, the premature gray at his temples, the deep lines around his eyes, the wary distance he kept from the investigation team. Mr. Donovan, Hargrove said, approaching him with the careful respect he reserved for victims' families. I want to thank you for coming, but also to caution you that this could be another false lead. We've had them before. Christopher nodded, his jaw tight. I remember all of them, Detective. Every phone call, every potential discovery, every disappointment. I'll manage my expectations. His eyes drifted to where Atlas still lay at the edge of the marked area, maintaining his vigilant watch. That's the dog that alerted. Yes, Mackenzie confirmed Atlas is specifically trained for long-term remains detection. And he's certain, Christopher asked, a fragile hope entering his voice for the first time. He is, Mackenzie replied simply. The certainty in her voice seemed to affect Christopher visibly, his shoulders straightening slightly. Once we start cutting, we'll work in 6-inch layers, the lead technician explained, adjusting his protective gear. If we hit anything that's not concrete, we stop immediately and switch to hand tools. The first cut sent a plume of fine dust into the air despite the water cooling system. The team worked methodically, the high-pitched whine of the saw creating a tense soundtrack as it scored a 3-soar at rectangle into the concrete. Atlas watched from his position near Mackenzie, his attention unwavering as technicians alternated between cutting and carefully removing sections of concrete. 8 inches down, the saw hit something that wasn't concrete. Stop called the lead technician, immediately shutting down the equipment. Material change. The team switched to manual chisels and smaller tools, working with archaeological precision to expose what lay beneath. As they carefully cleared away more concrete, a dark plastic material became visible. "Looks like heavy-duty construction plastic," observed one technician photographing each stage of the removal. The kind used for vapor barriers under foundations. Working with painstaking care, they exposed more of the black plastic, which appeared to be wrapped around something substantial. The distinct smell of decomposition, faint but unmistakable, permeated the immediate area as more concrete was removed. "That's human," Hargrove confirmed grimly, stepping back to allow the forensic team more space. Atlas, who had maintained his position throughout the process, whined softly, his earlier agitation replaced by a solemn alertness that Mackenzie recognized from previous recoveries. His job now complete, he waited patiently for what would come next. Christopher Donovan had gone pale, leaning against a support column several feet away. His eyes fixed on the excavation, Mackenzie moved to stand near him, offering a silent presence without intruding on his grief. "All these years," he said quietly, "part of me hoped he just walked away, started a new life somewhere. Even that would have been better than this." With the concrete fully removed from the top of the plastic-wrapped bundle, the medical examiner stepped forward to supervise the final uncovering. Dr. Elaine Cooper had been with the county for nearly 20 years, her steady hand guiding countless death investigations with meticulous care. Layer by layer, they documented and then carefully peeled back the plastic sheeting, revealing what everyone had now expected but hoped against human remains. Despite the years and the conditions, enough remained to confirm they'd found an adult male. The skeleton largely intact, though the position suggested the body had been placed in the shallow hole rather than carefully arranged. "Blunt force trauma to the skull," Dr. Cooper noted, pointing to a distinctive fracture pattern visible in the cranium. "Significant enough to be fatal. We'll know more after proper examination, but I'd say that's cause of death." As they continued the careful excavation, a waterproof document pouch emerged from beneath the remains. Inside, water-damaged but still partially legible papers were visible. "Those look like financial documents," Hargrove observed, leaning closer as the forensic photographer captured images. "I can make out what looks like bank account numbers and project codes." Cunning. The most damning discovery came as they fully exposed the remains. A distinctive watch with a custom band still attached to the skeleton's wrist bones. Even after 12 years, the inscription was visible. "To Robert, 30 years of building dreams, 2007. That's my father's watch." Christopher confirmed, his voice cracking slightly. "It was custom made by a jeweler in Portland. The company gave it to him for his 30th anniversary with Donovan Construction." Hargrove placed a hand on Christopher's shoulder. "I'm sorry, this isn't how any of us wanted this to end." "This isn't an ending, Detective," Christopher replied, a new resolve hardening his features. "This is finally a beginning. My family has lived with questions for 12 years. Now we can start getting answers." As the forensic team continued their methodical work, Mackenzie led Atlas to a quiet corner of the warehouse for a water break and rest period. The Belgian Malinois drank thirstily from his portable bowl, while Hargrove approached, observing the pair with newfound respect. "I've worked with K9 units before." The detective admitted, the gruffness in his voice softened by genuine admiration. "But never seen anything quite like what your dog did today. How does he detect remains after so many years under concrete?" Hargrove asked, watching Atlas settle into a controlled rest position, still attentive to his surroundings. Mackenzie smiled, offering Atlas a well-deserved treat from her pouch. "It's all science wrapped in an extraordinary biological package. Atlas's nose contains over 300 million olfactory receptors compared to our pitiful 6 million. His brain dedicates roughly 40 times more neural processing to scent analysis than ours does." She stroked Atlas's head as he settled beside her. "When human bodies decompose, they release over 400 chemical compounds. Atlas is specifically trained to recognize the most persistent ones, putrescine and cadaverin being the primary scent signatures, along with various sulfur compounds that remain present for decades. But through concrete, Hargrove questioned, clearly fascinated despite his decades of police experience. Decomposition odors are surprisingly mobile. Mackenzie explained, those molecules can travel through seemingly solid barriers. Concrete especially is actually quite porous. Microscopically, studies have shown properly trained dogs can detect these compounds at concentrations as low as 1 part per trillion. That's like finding a single drop in 20 Olympic swimming pools. Hargrove remarked, clearly impressed. Mackenzie nodded. Exactly, no technology we have can match it. Ground-penetrating radar might show anomalies, but it can't distinguish between a pipe, a rock, or human remains. Atlas can. Well, Hargrove said after a moment, I'm glad Judge Rosenthal issued that warrant, and I'm glad you two were assigned to this search instead of the usual patrol units. The acknowledgement meant more coming from Hargrove than it might have from anyone else in the department. His reputation for demanding excellence was legendary, and his approval was rarely given. After all these years, he continued, his voice taking on a reflective quality. I had almost convinced myself we'd never know what happened to Robert Donovan. His case has been on my desk, literally on my desk, not just metaphorically, for 12 years. Every morning I'd see that file and remember that I'd failed. Not just him, but his family. Mackenzie understood the weight of that burden. You didn't fail, detective. You kept searching when others would have given up. Maybe, Hargrove conceded, but it still took a dog to find what a dozen human investigators missed. He looked at Atlas with genuine respect. Sometimes the best detective isn't a detective at all. The next 48 hours transformed the abandoned warehouse into a hub of forensic activity. The medical examiner confirmed what everyone already suspected: the remains were those of Robert Donovan. Identification was verified through dental records and DNA comparison with samples provided by Christopher. Mackenzie and Atlas returned to the scene the morning after the discovery, having been requested to search the surrounding areas for any additional evidence. The warehouse had been sectioned into precise grid squares, with teams methodically processing each area. Cause of death is blunt force trauma to the posterior skull. Dr. Cooper explained during the morning briefing, single impact with significant force, creating a distinctive fracture pattern consistent with being struck from behind with a curved heavy object. Digital reconstructions of the skull displayed on a laptop showed the precise impact point and radiating fracture lines. The curvature and indentation suggest something like a heavy wrench or similar tool. Dr. Cooper continued, we're working on narrowing down the specific type of instrument. The financial documents recovered with the body had been carefully dried and preserved by document specialists. Though damaged, crucial information remained legible. These appear to be internal audit reports, explained Sarah Chen, the financial crime specialist assigned to the case. They document systematic discrepancies in billing and fund allocations for major projects between 2009 and 2011. She pointed to several highlighted sections. Someone was siphoning money from the company, hiding it through manipulated materials invoices. Based on these figures, we're looking at embezzlement, reaching well into 7 figures. The most significant breakthrough came from the watch found with the remains. The custom band had preserved something unexpected, a partial fingerprint on the inside clasp. The band's leather interior created a surprisingly good preservation environment. The fingerprint technician explained, displaying enhanced images. The oils from the fingerprint soaked into the leather and remained protected from environmental factors. It's partial, but we have enough points of comparison for identification. When run through the database, the print returned a match that sent a ripple of tension through the assembled investigators. Lawrence Mitchell, Donovan's former business partner, who had taken control of the company after his disappearance. But Mitchell had an alibi for the night Donovan disappeared. Hargrove noted, reviewing the original case files with the intensity that suggested he had them nearly memorized. For the evening, yes, Mackenzie pointed out as she studied the timeline board that had been established. But Donovan wasn't reported missing until 2 days later, when he failed to show up for a major project meeting. The concrete analysis provided another crucial connection. The forensic geologist had identified distinctive chemical markers in the mixture. This particular blend contains an unusual ratio of additives, specifically an anti-freezing agent that wasn't commonly used in this region. She explained, "We've traced it to a specific supplier that sold exclusively to 4 companies in 2011-2012. One of those was Metrocrete, a subsidiary of Mitchell Development, which was created about 8 months after Donovan disappeared." Hargrove finished the pieces falling into place with almost audible clicks. As they connected the evidence threads, Atlas alerted to another area near where the body had been found. Careful excavation revealed a tool cache buried approximately 2 feet beneath the concrete, a heavy pipe wrench with traces of blood in its grooves, along with concrete finishing tools. "DNA testing on the blood residue will take time," the lab technician cautioned, "but the pattern of the wrench head appears consistent with the fracture pattern on the skull." The coincidences had become too numerous to ignore Lawrence Mitchell. Now a prominent real estate developer worth millions had built his empire on the foundation of his partner's construction company, a company that financial records suggested he had been systematically defrauding until Donovan apparently discovered the embezzlement. "We have enough for a warrant," Hargrove declared, gathering the evidence summaries. "Let's pay Mr. Mitchell a visit. And bring Atlas," he added, nodding toward the Belgian Malinois, who sat attentively beside Mackenzie. "I want to see how our suspect reacts to him." Lawrence Mitchell's office occupied the top floor of the Mitchell Development Building, a gleaming 12-story structure in downtown Pine Haven that stood as a testament to his success over the past decade. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city Robert Donovan had helped build, including several landmark projects that bore the Donovan construction logo, now gradually being replaced with Mitchell Development signage as renovations permitted. The reception area featured sleek, modern furnishings in chrome and glass, with abstract art pieces that Mackenzie recognized as being from a prestigious Portland gallery. The corporate success on display formed a stark contrast to the abandoned warehouse where Robert Donovan's remains had lain for 12 years. Detective Hargrove Mitchell greeted them with practiced charm rising from behind an imposing glass desk. At 62, he maintained the fit physique of someone 20 years younger. His silver hair perfectly styled his tailored suit, subtly communicating wealth without ostentation. "And Officer Rivers, is it? What can I do for Pine Haven's finest today?" His confident smile faltered slightly when he noticed Atlas sitting alertly beside Mackenzie. "We're investigating new developments in the Robert Donovan disappearance," Hargrove stated, studying Mitchell's reaction with the careful attention of a detective who had conducted thousands of interviews over his career. "After all these years? Well, that's certainly unexpected." Mitchell gestured toward a seating area where leather chairs surrounded a coffee table bearing architectural magazines and a model of Mitchell Development's newest project. "Though I'm not sure what insight I could possibly add after so much time. As you know, Robert was my business partner and close friend. His disappearance was devastating personally and professionally." An attorney Mackenzie didn't recognize sat quietly in the corner, observing the exchange. The presence of legal counsel before they had even mentioned the nature of their visit was telling. "We've located Robert Donovan's remains," Hargrove said bluntly, watching Mitchell carefully. The businessman's composure slipped momentarily, a slight widening of the eyes, a nearly imperceptible tightening of his jaw before he recovered. "My God," he breathed, setting down the water glass he'd been holding. "Where, how?" "Buried under concrete in one of his former warehouses," Hargrove replied, "the one on Industrial Parkway." That's horrible." Mitchell managed his complexion noticeably paler than when they had arrived. "Have you notified Elizabeth and Christopher?" he added, referring to Donovan's wife and son. "We have," Hargrove confirmed. They were understandably shocked, particularly by the manner of death, blunt, force trauma to the skull. Mitchell swallowed visibly. "Murder, then? Who could have done such a thing?" Mr. Mitchell, Hargrove interrupted. "We need to ask about your relationship with Metrocrete, the concrete company you established in 2012. The abrupt change in topic seemed to throw Mitchell off balance. "Metrocrete. It was a small subsidiary we created for specialized projects. We sold it off years ago." "What does that have to do with Robert?" "The concrete used to conceal Mr. Donovan's body matches the proprietary blend used exclusively by Metrocrete during that period," Hargrove explained. "A rather specific connection, wouldn't you agree?" Mitchell's attorney, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. "Detective, if you're implying something, I suggest you be direct. Mr. Mitchell has cooperated fully with this investigation from the beginning. We'd like permission to examine your private workshop." Mackenzie interjected, "The one at your lake house. Anvari in." "My workshop?" Mitchell's surprise seemed genuine. "Why on earth?" The tool used to kill Robert Donovan had a distinctive impact pattern. Hargrove explained, "We believe it was a specific model of pipe wrench. Our records indicate you're something of a collector of vintage tools." "This is absurd," Mitchell said, standing abruptly. "I've been a pillar of this community for decades. Robert was my friend. We built our company together from nothing. And yet Hargrove pressed internal audit documents found with Donovan's body suggest he had discovered someone embezzling funds from major projects funds that appear to have financed the creation of Metro Crete and subsequently Mitchell Development's expansion. A9. The room fell silent as Mitchell stared at them, calculation visible behind his eyes. Finally, his attorney spoke. "If you want to examine any of Mr. Mitchell's properties, you'll need a warrant." "Already have one," Hargrove replied, producing the document. "For both your workshop and your office here, our forensic team is already processing your tools at the lake house." The controlled facade Mitchell had maintained began crumbling. "This is a witch hunt based on circumstantial..." "We also found this," Mackenzie added quietly, placing a photograph on the table, showing the custom watch recovered with Donovan's remains. "Your fingerprint was on the clasp Mr. Mitchell preserved for 12 years. Atlas, who had remained perfectly behaved throughout the exchange, suddenly stood his attention fixed on Mitchell with the same intense focus he'd shown at the warehouse. His posture shifted subtly, not aggressive, but alert in a way that Mackenzie recognized immediately. It was his cadaver detection posture, though there were no remains present. "Why is that dog staring at me?" Mitchell demanded, his voice rising as he took a step back. "He's alerting to the scent of death." Mackenzie said simply, "The same scent he detected under that concrete floor? Interesting that he's picking it up here in your office. Dogs can detect trace amounts of decomposition scent on objects or people who've been in contact with human remains," Hargrove added, watching Mitchell's reaction carefully. "Even years later, even after cleaning, the molecules are remarkably persistent." Mitchell's face contorted with a series of emotions, fear giving way to anger, then to a resigned calculation. For a moment, Mackenzie thought he might try to flee, but instead he sank back into his chair, the weight of 12 years of deception finally breaking his composure. "It was an accident," he whispered hoarsely, ignoring his attorney's attempt to silence him. "Robert found the discrepancies in the books, confronted me at the warehouse that night. I never meant to hit him that hard." The attorney stood abruptly. "Mr. Mitchell, I must advise you to say nothing further." But Mitchell seemed beyond legal counsel now, the confession pouring out as if a dam had broken. "We'd been friends for 30 years, built everything together. But when the recession hit in 2008, I got in too deep with some investments, started borrowing from the company, just temporarily, I told myself. But temporary became permanent," Hargrove prompted quietly. Mitchell nodded, his earlier polish completely gone. "Robert was always too detail-oriented for his own good. He personally reviewed every major project's financials, found my modifications to the billing systems. He was going to expose everything would have destroyed both of us, the whole company. So you killed him instead," Hargrove said, not as a question, but as a statement. "I just wanted to stop him." Mitchell insisted, his voice cracking. "Make him listen to reason. I grabbed a wrench from his tool cabinet, meant to threaten him, make him back off, but he turned away, dismissing me. And I swung, never even saw his face as he fell." Mackenzie noticed that Atlas had maintained his alert posture, still sensing the molecules of death that had clung to Mitchell for 12 years, invisible to humans but unmistakable to his extraordinary sensory capabilities. "Washed Lawrence Mitchell, you're under arrest for the murder of Robert Donovan," Hargrove said, the professional detachment in his voice belied by the cold satisfaction in his eyes. "You have the right to remain silent." As Hargrove recited the Miranda warnings, Mackenzie observed Mitchell's physical collapse. The proud, successful businessman reduced to a hunched figure in an expensive suit, decades of lies, finally caught by a dog who could detect what humans had missed for 12 years. Ese with Torito when inyo. 3 days later, Lawrence Mitchell stood before a judge for his arraignment, charged with second-degree murder and financial crimes that would likely keep him imprisoned for the remainder of his life. He had already accepted a plea deal to avoid trial. The case that had haunted Pine Haven for over a decade had finally been resolved, bringing closure not just to the Donovan family, but to the entire community. In the quiet of the K-9 unit's training field behind the precinct, Mackenzie watched Atlas joyfully retrieving his favorite ball, a simple reward for extraordinary work. The Belgian Malinois showed no signs of understanding the significance of what he'd accomplished, content in the simple pleasure of play after a job well done. Detective Hargrove approached, hands in his pockets against the winter chill. His impending retirement had been temporarily postponed to allow him to complete the Donovan case documentation and ensure that all loose ends were properly tied. The DA says it's open and shut. He reported watching Atlas return with the ball. Between the financial documents, the concrete evidence, the fingerprint, and Mitchell's confession, there's no question about the outcome. He'll serve at least 20 years before possibility of parole is heard. The family can finally lay him to rest properly. Mackenzie noted, throwing the ball again for Atlas, who raced after it with boundless energy. Elizabeth is flying in from California tomorrow. Hargrove confirmed. Christopher has arranged a proper funeral for next week. Closed casket, of course, but the community will finally have a chance to say goodbye. He paused, watching Atlas return triumphantly with the ball. I've worked hundreds of cases in my career, he said, his voice taking on a reflective quality. Never would have solved this one without him. He reached down to give Atlas a respectful pat as the dog dropped the ball at Mackenzie's feet. Chief wants to do some kind of commendation ceremony next week. First time we've given an official citation to a four-legged officer. Mackenzie smiled. Atlas doesn't care about ceremonies, but he'll take another ball and a steak dinner. He deserves it, Hargrove agreed. You both do. He hesitated, then added, I'm putting in an official request to expand the K-9 program before I retire. We need more teams like yours, specialized detection officers who understand what these dogs can do beyond the basics. You think the budget committee will approve it? Mackenzie asked. They will, after I show them the press coverage from the Donovan case. Nothing opens municipal wallets like positive publicity. He smiled ruefully. One small benefit of a high-profile case resolution, I suppose. Hargrove checked his watch. I should get back. Paperwork doesn't file itself, unfortunately. As he turned to leave, he paused. Officer Rivers, you and Atlas gave more than justice to the Donovan family. You gave me a proper ending to my career. I won't forget that. After he'd gone, Mackenzie sat on a bench at the edge of the training field, watching Atlas explore the perimeter with the restless energy that characterized his breed. What would her life have been like if she'd stayed in the military, or if she'd never found the K-9 program after returning home? The thought of continuing to struggle alone without Atlas' steady presence and the purpose their work provided was almost unimaginable now. Christopher Donovan had called that morning to thank her personally. You've given my family a chance to heal, he'd said, his voice rough with emotion. For 12 years, I've been stuck in this limbo between grief and hope. Now at least I know I can finally move forward. Moving forward. That's what Atlas had given her too in his way. The ability to focus on the present moment, to use her training and skills for something meaningful, to build a partnership based on trust and communication that transcended the barrier she'd erected after her military service. As the winter sun began to set over the training field, Mackenzie threw the ball one more time, watching Atlas race into the fading light, a simple creature with extraordinary gifts, blissfully unaware that he had just solved a 12-year-old murder and brought peace to a family torn apart by uncertainty. In a world of advanced technology and sophisticated investigative techniques, it had taken the ancient bond between human and dog to uncover the truth buried beneath layers of concrete and deception. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful tools aren't the newest or most complex, but those that have evolved alongside us through thousands of years of partnership, the silent communication between species that can speak volumes when we learn to listen. Atlas returned with the ball, dropping it expectantly at Mackenzie's feet. Ready for more, always ready for the next challenge, the next search, the next opportunity to use his remarkable abilities. And Mackenzie, watching her partner's eager anticipation, felt a surge of gratitude for the unexpected path that had brought them together and the extraordinary work they would continue to do, finding what was hidden, giving voice to the silent, bringing light to darkness, one search at a time. The news of Lawrence Mitchell's arrest and confession spread through Pine Haven like wildfire, transforming the sleepy Oregon town into the center of a media storm. Television vans from Portland, Seattle, and even national networks lined the courthouse square, reporters conducting stand-ups against the backdrop of the century-old county building where Mitchell had been arraigned. The case had every element the media craved: wealth, betrayal, a decade-old mystery, and the unusual detail of a specialized cadaver dog making the breakthrough discovery. Mackenzie had declined all interview requests, uncomfortable with the spotlight and protective of Atlas's work being sensationalized. The department's public information officer had instead released a carefully worded statement acknowledging the K-9 unit's contribution while emphasizing the collaborative effort of the entire investigative team. Despite her attempts to maintain a low profile, Mackenzie couldn't escape the wave of gratitude from the community. It came in small gestures: a free coffee at Riverside Cafe, a handwritten note tucked under her windshield wiper, a local pet store owner insisting on providing Atlas with premium food on the house for the next 6 months. Each acknowledgement made her simultaneously proud and uneasy, the latter a remnant of her military training that emphasized the team over individual recognition. A week after Mitchell's arrest, Mackenzie sat in her modest apartment, reviewing the final case report she would submit the following day. Atlas lay on his specialized orthopedic bed nearby, occasionally sighing contentedly in his sleep. The apartment walls, once bare when she'd first returned to civilian life, now held framed photographs marking milestones in their partnership: their certification ceremony, their first successful recovery, the team award they'd received last year. Her phone buzzed with an incoming text from Dana Schmidt, the department psychologist who had been instrumental in her adjustment after returning from deployment. Saw the news coverage, proud of you and Atlas. Remember our conversation about accepting recognition? This is one of those times you earn this. Mackenzie smiled, appreciating Dana's gentle persistence. Their weekly sessions had gradually decreased to monthly check-ins, but the psychologist remained a steadfast support, particularly when cases triggered Mackenzie's PTSD symptoms or when her tendency toward isolation became pronounced. The doorbell rang, startling Atlas from his sleep. He was immediately alert, moving to the door with focused attention, though his body language remained relaxed, recognizing this as a non-threat situation. "Easy, boy," Mackenzie murmured, checking the peephole before opening the door to reveal Christopher Donovan. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, standing awkwardly in the hallway. "The department gave me your address. I wanted to speak with you before the funeral tomorrow." "Of course," Mackenzie replied, stepping back to allow him entry. "Can I offer you some coffee?" "Thank you," Christopher said, entering the apartment with the careful movements of someone uncomfortable in unfamiliar territory. He paused when he saw Atlas, who had assumed a polite sitting position, sizing up the visitor with intelligent eyes. "So this is the dog who found my father," Christopher said, his voice catching slightly. "This is Atlas," Mackenzie confirmed. "He's off duty now, so you're welcome to pet him if you'd like." Christopher knelt slowly, extending his hand for Atlas to sniff before gently stroking the dog's head. "How do you even begin to thank the creature who brought your family the truth after 12 years? He asked, more to himself than to Mackenzie. "How did you know? What did you sense that everyone else missed for so long?" Atlas leaned slightly into Christopher's touch, as if recognizing the significance of this connection between himself and the son of the man he had found. "My mother arrives tonight," Christopher said, accepting the mug Mackenzie offered as they moved to the small living area. "She's remarried, living in California now. Her husband seems like a good man, supportive, But this has shaken her deeply. We all assumed after so many years that we'd never know. You learn to live with that uncertainty, it becomes part of you. He stared into his coffee, gathering his thoughts. And then suddenly the uncertainty is gone, replaced by a terrible certainty. My father was murdered by his best friend, the man who gave a speech at my wedding, who sent me Christmas cards every year, who helped me take over the remnants of the family business. I can't imagine what you're going through, Mackenzie said quietly. The betrayal is almost worse than the murder, Christopher admitted. All these years, Mitchell looked me in the eye, pretended to mourn alongside us, even established a scholarship in my father's name at the community college. He shook his head in disbelief. The performance of it all, that's what I can't comprehend. The funeral is tomorrow, Christopher continued after a moment. It's going to be complicated. Half the town reveres my father's memory. The other half has benefited from Mitchell's developments over the past decade. People who worked for both men, political alliances, business relationships, it's all tangled together. The community will rally around your family, Mackenzie assured him, though she understood his concerns. In small towns like Pine Haven, the social web was intricate and inescapable. I wanted to ask, Christopher said, hesitating briefly, would you and Atlas attend the service? I know it's an unusual request, but somehow it feels right that the ones who finally uncovered the truth should be there when we lay him to rest. The request caught Mackenzie off guard. She had attended victims' funerals before, but always in an official capacity, usually standing at a respectful distance. This felt more personal. We'd be honored, she replied simply. Christopher nodded, relieved. Thank you, it's at First Presbyterian, 2 o'clock. There will be a private burial afterward for family only, but the service is open to the community. As he stood to leave, Christopher reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small wooden box. This was recovered from my father's, from the scene. Detective Hargrove returned it to me yesterday, after they finished processing it for evidence. He opened the box to reveal a vintage pocket watch, tarnished, but still elegant. It was his grandfather's, Christopher explained. He always said it was his good luck. Charm kept it in his pocket at every major project. Groundbreaking. A sad smile crossed his face. Not such good luck in the end, I suppose, but I thought you should see it. It's one of the items that helped identify him along with his wedding ring and the wristwatch. Mackenzie nodded, understanding the significance of this small connection to the man they had found after so many years. Hargrove told me your dog was absolutely certain, Christopher said, closing the box carefully, that he wouldn't give up until someone paid attention. That's what I needed, someone who wouldn't give up on finding my father. After Christopher left, Mackenzie sat beside Atlas on the floor, one arm draped across his muscular shoulders. You did good, partner, she murmured. Really good. The following afternoon, First Presbyterian Church was filled beyond capacity with mourners spilling onto the steps outside, despite the February chill. The mayor had declared a day of remembrance for Robert Donovan, and many businesses in the downtown area had closed for the afternoon to allow employees to attend the service. Mackenzie and Atlas arrived early, taking a position at the back of the sanctuary. She had dressed in her formal uniform, Atlas wearing his official K9 vest, a mark of respect rather than working attire. They attracted curious glances and whispered comments, but Mackenzie kept her focus forward, maintaining a professional demeanor. Detective Hargrove approached, looking almost unrecognizable in a dark suit instead of his usual rumpled blazer. Officer Rivers, he acknowledged with a nod. Didn't expect to see you here. Christopher Donovan invited us, she explained. It felt right to attend. Hargrove nodded in understanding. Closure works both ways sometimes, for the family but also for those of us who carried the weight of the unanswered questions. The detective looked unusually reflective, the formal setting perhaps encouraging a rare moment of openness. I visited Mitchell at the detention center yesterday, part of wrapping up the case file. Okay, how was he? Mackenzie asked, more out of professional courtesy than genuine concern. Resigned, cooperative. His legal team has negotiated a plea deal, second-degree murder, 15 to 25 years. He'll be an old man when he gets out, if he ever does. Hargrove shook his head. Said something that's been bothering me, though, that in some strange way he's relieved it's finally over. Carrying a secret like that for 12 years, Mackenzie observed, must have been its own kind of prison. I suppose, Hargrove conceded, though he seemed to manage the burden quite comfortably while building his fortune on Donovan's grave. Before their conversation could continue, a hush fell over the gathering as the Donovan family entered Elizabeth. Donovan, now in her early 60s, but still carrying herself with elegant dignity, was supported on one side by her current husband and on the other by Christopher. Behind them followed an assortment of family members, Robert's younger brother, several cousins, and Christopher's wife and teenage children. The service was a blend of traditional Presbyterian liturgy and personal remembrances. Christopher delivered a powerful eulogy that acknowledged both the pain of loss and the relief of finally knowing the truth. He spoke of his father's dedication to the community, his integrity in business, and his devotion to family qualities that stood in stark contrast to the betrayal that had ended his life. My father believed in building things that would last, Christopher concluded, his voice steady, despite the emotion evident in his expression. Buildings, relationships, community. His legacy isn't in the structures that bear his name, but in the values he lived. By truth, honesty, loyalty. In the end, it was his commitment to those values that cost him his life. He discovered deception and refused to look away. Today we honor not just his memory, but the principles he died defending. As the service concluded, Elizabeth Donovan approached Mackenzie and Atlas, her eyes red-rimmed, but her composure intact. Officer Rivers, she said, extending her hand. Christopher told me about your work, about this remarkable dog who found Robert after all these years. Mahabraminam. Mackenzie acknowledged, taking the offered hand. I'm very sorry for your loss. My loss happened 12 years ago. Elizabeth replied with quiet dignity. What you've given us is the truth that's a gift beyond measure, however painful. She looked down at Atlas, who maintained perfect behavior despite the crowded, emotionally charged environment. May I? At Mackenzie's nod, Elizabeth gently placed her hand on Atlas's head. Thank you. She whispered, an intimate moment of connection between the grieving widow and the animal who had uncovered her husband's fate. As the Donovan family departed for the private burial, Mackenzie and Atlas remained on the church steps, acknowledging the respectful nods from community members who recognized their role in bringing closure to the long-standing mystery. You handled that well, came a voice beside her. Mackenzie turned to find Dana Schmidt, the department psychologist, observing her with professional interest. I didn't do much, Mackenzie replied, just stood there. You showed up. Dana corrected. You allowed yourself to be part of the community's healing process. That's significant progress from the woman who could barely tolerate the department holiday party last year. Mackenzie smiled wryly, acknowledging the observation. Maybe Atlas is rubbing off on me. He's never had a problem connecting with people. Animals often show us the way. Dana agreed, watching as a young child cautiously approached Atlas, receiving a gentle acknowledgement from the disciplined working dog. They're not burdened by the barriers we create. They're simply present in each moment. The commendation ceremony is tomorrow, Mackenzie said, changing the subject. Chief insisted despite my protest. And how do you feel about that? Dana asked, slipping effortlessly into therapist mode. Uncomfortable, Mackenzie admitted. Atlas did the work I just translated. That partnership goes both ways. Dana pointed out, Atlas needed you to understand what he was communicating, to advocate for him when others were skeptical. Your trust in him made the discovery possible. As they spoke, Hargrove approached again, now accompanied by the mayor and several city council members. There she is, the detective announced, the officer I was telling you about. Mackenzie braced herself for the political small talk that would inevitably follow the practiced platitudes and campaign-ready handshakes. Dana gave her an encouraging nod before discreetly stepping away. Officer Rivers, the mayor began, on behalf of the city of Pine Haven, I want to express our profound gratitude for your work in resolving the Donovan case. Our community has carried this wound for far too long. Thank you, sir, Mackenzie replied professionally. It was a team effort. Detective Hargrove has been pursuing this case tirelessly for 12 years. Indeed, the mayor acknowledged, turning to include Hargrove in his remarks, a testament to our department's commitment to justice, regardless of how long it takes. Mackenzie recognized the subtle pivot to talking points. Likely preparing for the press conference that would follow, politics had never been her strong suit, even before her military service had reinforced her preference for direct communication. And this must be the famous Atlas. The mayor continued, addressing the dog with the slightly exaggerated tone people often use with animals. The hero of the hour. Atlas maintained his dignified sitting position, unimpressed by the political attention. Mackenzie suppressed a smile, appreciating her partner's steadfast focus amidst the human complications swirling around them. I understand there's a commendation ceremony tomorrow, the mayor said, turning back to Mackenzie. I'd like to present a key to the city as well, if that's acceptable. The media coverage of this case has been extraordinary. National networks picked it up. It's a perfect opportunity to highlight Pine Haven's innovative law enforcement approaches. Mackenzie exchanged a glance with Hargrove, who gave an almost imperceptible shrug as if to say, politics, what can you do? Atlas and I are simply doing our job, sir, she replied diplomatically. But we appreciate the recognition. As the conversation continued, Mackenzie found herself observing the gathering with a newfound perspective. These were not just abstract community members, but individuals connected to her through the shared experience of living in Pine Haven, through the collective trauma of Robert Donovan's disappearance, and the complicated relief of finally knowing his fate. Perhaps Dana was right. Maybe this was progress, allowing herself to be present, not just physically, but emotionally, accepting that her work with Atlas created meaningful connections, whether she sought them or not. The commendation ceremony the following day transformed the usually utilitarian police department briefing room into something approaching formal. Chairs had been arranged in rows, a podium set up at the front, and the department's seldom used flags positioned on stands. The room was filled beyond capacity with officers, city officials, and selected media representatives crowded into the space. Mackenzie stood at parade rest near the side wall, Atlas sitting perfectly beside her. She had polished her boots to a mirror shine and meticulously pressed her dress uniform habits instilled during her military service that resurfaced during formal occasions. Chief Morgan, a 30-year veteran of the department known for his gruff efficiency, seemed almost uncomfortable with the ceremonial role thrust upon him. He adjusted his reading glasses before addressing the assembly. Today we recognize extraordinary service in the pursuit of justice. He began, his voice carrying the slight rasp developed over decades of issuing commands at crime scenes. The resolution of the Robert Donovan case represents the best of what law enforcement can accomplish: persistence, teamwork, and the application of specialized skills in service to our community. He proceeded to acknowledge the contributions of various team members: Detective Hargrove's 12 years of investigation, the forensic technicians who had processed the scene, and the prosecutors who had secured Mitchell's plea deal. But today we especially recognize Officer Mackenzie Rivers and her K-9 partner Atlas, whose specialized training and remarkable capabilities led to the discovery that broke this case wide open. As Mackenzie and Atlas approached the podium, she felt a familiar tightness in her chest. Not quite anxiety, but a heightened awareness that came with being the center of attention. She focused on the weight of Atlas's lead in her hand, the solid presence of her partner beside her, drawing strength from the simplicity of their connection amidst the human complexity of ceremony. Chief Morgan presented her with a departmental commendation, then surprised her by kneeling to place a specialized medal on Atlas's vest, a custom-designed K-9 recognition emblem that matched her own. In recognition of extraordinary service, the chief announced, straightening with a grunt that betrayed his aging knees. And in acknowledgement that sometimes our four-legged officers make contributions beyond what we could achieve alone, the mayor stepped forward next, presenting the promised key to the city with appropriate flourish for the cameras. Mackenzie accepted it with a polite smile, already planning to place it in the growing collection of recognitions that gathered dust on her bookshelf. As the formal portion of the ceremony concluded, Mackenzie found herself surrounded by well-wishers, fellow officers offering congratulatory handshakes, city officials angling for photographs, and surprisingly, several family members of other cold case victims who had received permission to attend. "Your dog," one woman said, tears welling in her eyes as she clutched Mackenzie's hand. "Could he find my daughter? She's been missing for 3 years. The police searched, but..." Mackenzie felt the familiar weight of expectation, the desperate hope that Atlas's abilities could provide the answers others hadn't found. She'd encountered similar requests before and had developed a response that balanced compassion with realism. "I can't make promises," she said gently, "but I'd be happy to speak with the detective handling your daughter's case. Atlas has specific training, and there are protocols for requesting K-9 assistance." "Correct." The woman nodded gratefully, pressing a worn photograph into Mackenzie's hand. "Her name is Jessica. She'd be 22 now. Please just look at her face." Mackenzie accepted the photo, recognizing it as the same gesture of desperate hope she'd witnessed countless times, as if memorizing the face might somehow increase the chances of discovery. "I'll speak with the detective," she promised, again carefully tucking the photo into her pocket. As the crowd gradually dispersed, Hargrove approached, looking uncomfortable in his dress uniform, but somehow more at peace than Mackenzie had ever seen him. "Congratulations," he said simply, "well deserved." "Thank you, Detective Atlas, and I appreciate your support throughout the investigation." Hargrove glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "I submitted my retirement paperwork this morning. Effective end of next month. During the shine. Ikfarn." "Congratulations," Mackenzie replied, genuinely pleased for him. Going out on a high note, "The Donovan case was my white whale." Hargrove admitted, "Couldn't walk away with that still open now." He shrugged. "Seems like the right time. Any plans for retirement?" A smile flickered across the detective's usually solemn features. "My daughter lives up in Washington, has 2 kids I barely know. Thought I might get a place nearby, see if I can figure out how to be a grandfather." He looked almost embarrassed by the admission, as if revealing a secret weakness. "They'll be lucky to have you," Mackenzie said sincerely. "One more thing before I go," Hargrove added. "That photograph the woman gave you. Jessica Collins, I handled the initial investigation when she disappeared. We suspected an ex-boyfriend, but could never build a case." He hesitated. "I've got the file in my desk. If you're interested, I could brief you on it. Might be worth a fresh look, especially with your partner's capabilities." Mackenzie nodded, understanding the significance of Hargrove entrusting one of his unsolved cases to her. "I'd appreciate that. Maybe Monday?" "Monday works," he confirmed, "and Rivers. Whatever happens with the Collins girl, you've already done more good for this community than most officers manage in a full career. Remember that." The unexpected praise from the normally taciturn detective caught Mackenzie off guard. She watched as he made his way through the remaining crowd, stopping to speak with the chief before disappearing down the hallway toward his office. That evening, Mackenzie took Atlas to the abandoned quarry on the outskirts of town, a favorite training location where they could work without interruption. The February chill had deepened as the sun set, but the physical exertion of training kept both handler and dog comfortably warm. "Find it, Atlas," she commanded, releasing him to search for the training aids she had carefully hidden among the rocky terrain. The Belgian Malinois moved with focused precision, his nose working continuously as he navigated the challenging landscape. Within minutes, he had located the first scent source, a small vial containing decomposition essence buried beneath a shallow layer of gravel. Atlas immediately gave his passive alert, sitting and staring intently at the location, before looking back at Mackenzie for confirmation. "Good boy," she praised, rewarding him with his favorite tug toy. "Excellent work." They continued through each training scenario, Atlas performing flawlessly, despite the unusual hour and the full day of ceremonies behind them. This was their shared language, the work that connected them beyond the confines of formal settings and public recognition. As they completed the final exercise, Mackenzie sat on a boulder, overlooking the quarry, Atlas settling beside her, in comfortable companionship. The stars were emerging in the clear winter sky, pinpricks of light against deepening darkness. She pulled Jessica Collins's photograph from her pocket, studying the young woman's face in the fading light. Dark hair, bright smile eyes that suggested intelligence and humor, frozen in time 3 years earlier, before whatever fate had befallen her. Atlas nudged her arm gently, his warm presence a contrast to the cold stone beneath them and the chilling mystery in her hand. "What do you think, partner?" she asked quietly. "Should we take on Hargrove's cold case?" Atlas tilted his head slightly, his intelligent eyes focused on her face, with the unwavering attention that had drawn her to him during their initial training. "Yeah, I think so too," Mackenzie agreed, as if he had answered, "One more family that needs answers." The decision felt right, a natural continuation of the work they had just completed. Not for recognition or commendation, but because they could. Because Atlas had the abilities, and she had the training to potentially uncover truths that others had missed. As darkness settled fully over the quarry, Mackenzie and Atlas made their way back to the department SUV, their path illuminated by her flashlight. Tomorrow would bring a new search, a new challenge, but the foundation remained the same. The partnership between handler and dog, the shared purpose that had given both of them a second chance. The Donovan case had brought them public recognition, but their true reward lay in the private moments, the silent communication, the mutual trust, the satisfaction of using their unique capabilities to bring light to darkness. For Atlas, each search was simply an opportunity to use the abilities bred into his DNA and honed through training. For Mackenzie, each case was a chance to channel her own traumatic experiences into something healing and restorative. Together, they would continue to search beneath the surface, finding what was hidden, giving voice to the silent, bringing truth to those who had waited too long for answers. Not because it was easy or glamorous work, but because it was necessary and because they were uniquely suited to do it. As they drove back toward town, the headlights illuminating the winding road ahead, Mackenzie glanced at Atlas in the rearview mirror. The Belgian Malinois sat alert in his specialized compartment, ready for whatever might come next. A silent guardian with extraordinary gifts partnered with a handler who had finally found her purpose. Tomorrow they would begin the search for Jessica Collins, and whatever they discovered, they would face it together, one search, one alert, one truth at a time. Have you ever witnessed an animal sense something that humans couldn't detect? Atlas's remarkable abilities might seem almost supernatural, but they're grounded in the extraordinary evolutionary gift of scent detection that makes dogs such valuable partners in law enforcement. Would you have trusted Atlas's instincts enough to break through that concrete floor? Or would you have sided with the skeptical Detective Hargrove, looking for more conventional evidence first? The partnership between handlers and their canines is built on a foundation of trust that often defies logical explanation, but delivers results that technology still can't match. If you've had an experience with a dog or other animal detecting something beyond human perception, share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear how animal instincts have made a difference in your life or someone you know. And if this story of canine heroism impressed you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another amazing canine tale. Your support helps us continue bringing these incredible stories to light. Share this video with friends and family who appreciate the extraordinary abilities of working dogs